you fools. We've been dancing with the devil way too long. I know it's fun, but get ready to pay your dues. Oh God, come back home. This crazy world is filled with liars and abusers. We need you now before we're too far gone. I hope one day they finally see the truth. God, we need you now.
Well, good evening, everyone. Share this out. Share it out. I'm telling you, you're not going to get this information anywhere else from any mainstream media, any independent media. You're not going to get this information. We're going to be talking about the Middle East and how it relates to the overall globalist agenda, because that's what this is all about. And I know there's a lot of people that are stuck with their own perception of what's happening, and that's okay. But there's nobody better to discuss this issue than my good friend Salim Mansour, who is a history professor emeritus from Western University. Salim is going to go through the history of how we got to where we are today. And again, you're not going to get this information anywhere else. So it's extremely important, and people really have to start to grasp what all of this is. And Salim's going to join us and help us to get there. Welcome, my friend.
Good evening, Mark. I think, how are you, my friend?
I'm good.
So, I'm good too. It's just getting cold a little bit here. I'm sure Saskatchewan is getting colder too. So
It is.
The temperature is dipping. And
Yes.
I don't know what you're going to do about the road trips. I was thinking that we might be able to beat the fall weather.
You know what? I grew up in Saskatchewan, so I'm used to it. It's all good.
Well, I've been 50 years in Ontario, I'm still not used to it.
Sure.
But it's a pleasure being with you this evening. Though the world is falling apart, we have much to think about and thank about also. We just had our Thanksgiving Day, and despite all our agitation and all our grievances and all our quarrels, when we look at the world outside, we are truly in one of the happy kingdoms that God gave us, and we are making a mess of it.
Yes, we are. We sure are. And it's darn time that people start to understand and grasp the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
And I'm hoping that you're going to be able to help people along with that, with this discussion.
Yes, there are volumes to talk about, but we can begin tonight. And so, yeah, what do you want to talk about, or where do you want to begin? And I'll catch up with you.
Well, I think it's important that we go back in time to set the stage where all of this started.
Yeah, Mark. As I have always sort of maintained as my basis of understanding issues is to contextualize them. Issues don't happen in a vacuum. I used to tell my students, I miss them very much now, but whenever I get a chance to talk to them, I would tell them, I would begin my year with them that, each one of you, including myself, we just didn't fall from the stork's beak or from the blue sky. There was a context. Two people got together under certain circumstances, and here we are. So if we got to understand ourselves, we got to go back to where we came from. So yeah, okay. The curious thing, Mark, I mean, there's so many different ways to approach this matter and to get into the discussion. The curious thing, just to start off with, is last week, or was it the week before? No, it was last week. You know, we were talking about, and the Canadian and the global media were focused upon the events that happened on September 22nd in the Canadian Parliament. The standing ovation given by 338 members to a former member of Waffen SS Galician Division. And we were talking about how did this come about? And what does it say about Canada? What does it say about the West? You know, and our association with the Nazis, and that this has been normalized, and that was the discussion. You know, I made a podcast with my good friend Robert. Actually, we made two podcasts. One was released soon after I spoke with you, and the other is going to be released either tomorrow or day after, depending upon where Robert is. But it is to remind the people, to remind ourselves as we get into this discussion tonight, is less than 2 weeks ago, the hottest news in Canada was, and it was not only in Canada, it was around the world, it was echoing. Every major mainstream media was picking it up, and of course alternate media, and pointing out that the Canadian Parliament is saluting a Waffen SS Galician Division member with Zelensky present. Okay, now let me suggest this. I think it was a big black eye for the globalists. They didn't expect that what they thought would just go through without anybody questioning it. You know, Americans have spent over $100 billion behind Ukraine war over the past 18 months. Canada, you know, the Prime Minister was boasting that they spent $9 billion and more is going to be coming, and so on and so forth. But we, you, I, those of us who have been in the weeds over the last 18 months knew that the Ukraine war had been basically, by the time that they gave a standing ovation to Yaroslav Hunka, was basically over. It was simply the money running, and Ukraine was a big laundromat for the globalists.
100%.
Right?
Yep.
You and I have talked about this over the past 18 months, about this particular war, the proxy war, NATO proxy war, with EU members involved in it, led by America as a globalist agenda, WEF agenda, you know, and so on. And we've been discussing that. And here we are, a week after the last time you and I spoke, the entire Ukraine war has disappeared from the agenda, from the mainstream media.
Right.
Now Zelensky is desperately trying to go to Israel. He wants the Prime Minister of Israel to invite him to Jerusalem so he can pick up some media time in Jerusalem, right? Because he's completely disappeared, right?
Yep.
And just like the Ukraine war made the COVID agenda disappear, and nobody was talking about COVID. I mean, remember, in February of 2022, on Valentine's Day, the Prime Minister of Canada imposed martial law, that is emergency order.
Yep.
Yes, that was 14th of February 2022. And within a week, the war in Ukraine took away all the arguments, the oxygen out of COVID-19. Right? It was just a flip of the page. And the globalist agenda shifted to the Ukraine war. And for the last 18 months, we have been consumed by that issue as we are facing hyperinflation, as we are facing, economic crisis of an order that, we can talk endlessly. The Europeans are going to shiver this winter. Their Nord Stream 2 was blown apart and so on and so forth. and Ukraine is flat with 500,000 young Ukrainian men killed, and over 2 million Ukrainian casualties, people who have lost their limb, people who are beaten down, and somewhere around 10 to 15 million Ukrainians who have fled Ukraine and are refugees across Europe and coming into Canada. Okay, and so that's the situation on September 22nd, and here we are talking about Israel and how terrible and how horrible and so on and so forth that happened this past weekend on October the 7th. And what are we to make about this? Are these all coincidences, or are these globalist operation against we the people? Whether we the people are in Europe, whether we the people are in North America, whether we the people are in Africa, in the Middle East, Asia. My proposition is to understand what is happening or has happened and is escalating is a new war that is being ignited by the globalists to distract, to deflect the people from the main issue, that the noose of globalism is tightening down around their neck unless the people break that noose, and the only way the noose will be broken is we the people keep our eye on the ball and understand that these divisions between Ukrainians and Russians, between Canadians, French-speaking and English-speaking, between, all the various multicultural groups in the Middle East, between, Iran and Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Egypt, and of course Israel at the middle of it, and therefore the conflict between Muslims and, Jews, and possibly 90% of the people in Canada don't know the differences between Sunni and Shia, Islamists and Islam, and Muslims in general, nor do they know the differences between an Orthodox Jew, a Reformed Jew, a conservative Jew, and so on and so forth. But all of that is made into a dog's breakfast, and it is a divide.
Yes.
And we have to figure out, that is, the people have to figure out, if they keep on chasing like a dog their tail, they will be forever chasing, and the globalists will be feeding the dog's breakfast. All right. Absolutely. So let's get back to it. What happened on Saturday, October the 7th, early in the morning, our time, which was somewhere around about 3-4 o'clock in the morning, because of the time difference between here and Palestine, Israel is about 10 hours. So about 5-6 o'clock in the morning, according to the news reports in Gaza, across Gaza and Israel, the Hamas, and I'll come back to who the Hamas are. The Hamas, these fanatic terrorists, these killers of babies and so on and so forth, all of that, is part of the propaganda arm, the PSYOP war, broke through the Gaza boundary with Israel and went on a rampage. And those who know the map of Israel, those who understand that is the map of that area, they went all the way up to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, which Gaza is right at the bottom, when that is about, a distance about 150 kilometers, shooting into towns, breaking into homes, massacring people, etc., etc., and the Israel was under siege. The fanatics said, come on over, and so on. So for about, between 6 and 10 hours, 12 hours, Israel was defenseless. Israel did not know what is happening, and the prime minister comes out, Bibi Netanyahu, and says, this is our 9/11. This is our Pearl Harbor.
But Salim, there was information, we're finding out now, of course,
yes,
after the fact, that they knew that this was coming, right?
So that's what I'm leading up to, Mark.
Right.
So what the question is, or the point is, the border between Gaza, stripped 25-mile long and less than 10 miles wide, and where there is 2.3 million people shoved in like sardines, that this border, which is the most heavily surveilled electronically, satellite, and all electronic media, the most heavily surveilled border, and the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, the most powerful military, army, air force, navy in all of Middle East. We have all heard the phenomenal stories of the 1967 war, the 1973 war, the 1948-49 war, all of this, 5 Arab armies coming in and they were defeated and so on and so forth. And here, these basically camel herders, these basically unarmed people, where are they getting the arms from? If it is the most secure border all around, it's controlled. Nothing can move there without the Israelis knowing about it, the Israeli intelligence knowing about it. How is it they get into motorbikes and SUVs and Ford pickup trucks and hand gliders, and they penetrate into Israel, and Israel is completely disarmed for about 12 hours. This is the 9/11, and they're crying for help now. And then the things start slowly turning back. They will say, we're going to flatten Gaza. We're going to bomb and flatten Gaza. Okay, 2.3 million people. All right, so that's your question. That's right. So that's your question. That's my question. I think that's the question of the global South. If the North American are going to be psyoped by the media and the Europeans, that these fanatic Muslims, these terrorists like these Taliban, and Taliban's are crazy people. We know that, but and the poor Israelis are defenseless. Then, as many Israelis themselves are saying, for instance, this man, I don't know if you've seen his talk, Miko Peled. Miko Peled is the son of one of the first chief of general staff of the IDF, belonging to the generation that founded Israel in 1948-49, General Mati Peled. Miko Peled is saying that after all of this massive investment and all of what we have boasted about, that is the Israelis have boasted about, he himself a former military officer, a handful of people penetrated our country.
Right.
How did this happen? So how did this happen? This is the 9/11 of Israel, or the Pearl Harbor of Israel. And what we now know, we, the people in North America and around the world, now know that 9/11 was an inside job. 19 camel herders with box cutters, and all of us know what powerful weapon the box cutter is. They got into, wide-bodied airplanes, hijacked it, and in the world's most controlled and defended airspace by NORAD, which has Canadian component to NORAD, these guys who cannot fly a kite, who according to the storyline, were training in Cessna, single-engine plane, took the most sophisticated jetliners and flew them on target into the two buildings and the Pentagon, an operation that was carried out from the takeoff to the crash of over 45 minutes to an hour, and NORAD was silent. NORAD did nothing. I mean, their entire training is that if such a thing happens, you shoot down the plane. Right? According to the storyline, the plane that eventually crashed in Pennsylvania because a number of Americans got up and they charged into the cockpit and they fought it out with the hijacker, and the plane crashed. That plane was heading for the Capitol building or the White House. But it was not brought down by the U.S. Air Force. It was brought down by the people in the plane fighting with the hijacker.
Right.
Now, as they say in Brooklyn, if you believe all of that, then I have a bridge to sell for you in Brooklyn,
Correct.
right? But it was a massive cover up. The Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld massive cover up of the 9/11 Commission report, and that is now all out. People can figure it out. And the people who have been asking those questions have been either airbrushed away, deplatformed, or silenced,
Right.
right? Pearl Harbor. Well, we now know that Pearl Harbor was another inside job. President Roosevelt had minute information of the movement of the Japanese fleet because the American cryptographers, the Office of Naval Intelligence, had broken the Japanese code.
Right.
And they had it right. The president in his daily briefing had it right there. And the president did not take any action he allowed. He did not inform the commanders in Hawaii,
Right.
who were later removed because they were faulted for sitting down and doing nothing, but they were not informed. And so this huge armada, Japanese armada, that set sail from Japan for an ocean traffic of a couple of thousand miles from Japan to Hawaii. It's over 2,000 miles, nautical miles. And they set sail, several aircraft carrier and destroyers and frigates and cruisers,
And nobody knew about it.
and nobody knew about it, right? and the entire Pearl Harbor fleet was locked up in Pearl Harbor. They were not dispersed. They didn't come out. And 2,500, from the top of my head, but around that figure, 2,500 in 9/11, it was around about 2,900. So 2,500, 2,900 Americans were sacrificed, and the whole Pearl Harbor fleet was sacrificed to the Japanese. And then the president went to the Congress on Monday, that was December 7, 1941, Sunday. On Monday morning, he went to the Congress, called it the Day of Infamy, and within a matter of an hour, the Congress declared war on Japan.
Right.
All right? Now,
And entered World War II.
and it was World War II. Now, the point is, to put the set in context, until December 7, 1941, 80% of Americans were opposed to going to war in Europe or anywhere else. That was the America First movement. The same America First movement that was there during World War I. In the lead up to Pearl Harbor, the voice of America First was Charles Lindbergh, the American hero, the man who crossed the Atlantic on a solo flight, Spirit of St. Louis. Massive rallies were taking place. And if the president had gone to war without being attacked, without America being attacked, then he would have been impeached. So he needed to have a pretext, and the pretext was Pearl Harbor. He created Pearl Harbor. Now, this is not fabrication, There are tons of books on this matter, records on this matter. People no longer buy. People who know this thing, they no longer buy the argument that the Japanese just sailed in and attacked Pearl Harbor. They were lured to it. The same thing in World War I. President Woodrow Wilson went for re-election just as Roosevelt went for re-election in 1940 when America was neutral. President Woodrow Wilson went into election in 1916 for his re-election when America was neutral and the war was going on in Europe. And he said that he will not take America to war, because if he had said that he will take America to war, or America would participate, he would have lost the election.
Right.
Okay, so he wins the election. He is inaugurated in March of 1917. In April of 1917, Lusitania happens. Those people who remember, Lusitania was a ship that was brought down by the German U-boats. And that was a pretext they used to go into war. Now, did the German bomb Lusitania because they were mad or crazy? They bombed the Lusitania because there had been warning the British and the French, that means also the Americans, that you cannot use passenger liners to ship armaments.
Right.
And Lusitania was packed up with armaments that was going from America to England. In other words, the American intelligence, the American president who wanted to go into war, put precisely against the German warning that, if you are sending arms and equipment into Europe, then your ships are going to be target.
Right.
That was all known.
Yep.
So there is no coincidence. There is no coincidence. So now we come back to the situation in Gaza. Okay, the bad guys, they break through the wall and they create mayhem. And now the good guys, the Zionists among the Israelis, especially Bibi Netanyahu, is going to flatten Gaza, and already that has begun. The flattening has begun. So it is a basic genocide. I mean, 2.3 million people are sitting ducks for whatever number of bad guys Hamas carried out this operation.
And there's people cheering that on, Salim.
And people in North America and elsewhere, that is the pro-Israeli group, just as the pro-Ukrainian group. Remember, if you go back to the Ukraine operation in February, March of 2022, there were all sorts of articles, and it carried on through the summer, articles of atrocities committed by Russia. The most famous one was at Bucha.
Yep.
And after a few days, the story was gone because the Russians provided the photographic evidence that this was done by the Azov battalion. The attack on
that's Russian disinformation.
That's disinformation. That's right. Exactly. And in fact, the other point is the special military operation was taken by the Russian in defense of the civilian population that was being daily bombed for the past 8 years from 2014.
Right.
And the bombing that was taking place, over 14,000 civilians had died, men, women, and children of different ages. And despite the Minsk agreement by Russia, 1 and 2, they had negotiated. Later on, Angela Merkel, who negotiated the Minsk agreement with Russia on behalf of Ukraine, she said this was to buy time. Buy time for what? Right. To equip the Ukrainian Nazi regime, first Petro Poroshenko, a Ukrainian Nazi, who also happens to be a Jew. And then in 2019, when Petro Poroshenko regime went down in the election and Zelensky was elected on the argument that he will bring peace.
Right.
So in 2019, Zelensky is elected. And what happens? The bombing continues. The language of peace was simply to deceive the people, to get the word. So for 8 years, the bombings continued till finally the Russian, Putin, moved his troops to give the protection to the people in the Donbass region. Okay, so here we are in the Middle East, in Israel.
Right.
All right.
Another baker's war.
Exactly. So here is a war breaking out, and this war can become. In fact, it is precisely planned and to provoke a counter response from the Syrians, from the Iranians, from, of course, Lebanon, the Hezbollah, because of the outrageous genocidal actions that Bibi Netanyahu is taking, backed by the American Congress. You can see now all the American people like Senator Lindsey Graham, his mouth is drooling with blood, or Josh Hawley, and we have to get these bad guys, we have to smash them, we have to teach them a lesson. Exactly. So this is the context within which I would offer to frame the situation our friends want to understand. And then, just like the SMO, Special Military Operation, one has to step back. For the SMO, one has to step back to 2014. For this operation, that has begun, one has to step back into the politics of the Middle East, especially the time of Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu is now the prime minister. He has been the prime. He's one of the longest serving prime minister, but he first became the prime minister in 1996, and his election in 1996 came as a result of the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995 by an Israeli right-wing fanatic of the religious sectarian Jews, okay, the settlers. Why was Yitzhak Rabin killed? Well, that's the history. Again, I can only give it in snapshot. And so let me go back to that, because one has to understand that, because who are these Hamas? One has to understand this,
Context is so important. Who created Hamas?
Exactly.
Right.
Who and where and what, we have to contextualize it.
Yes.
By the way, you said the Bankers' War, and you are absolutely right. All the wars, going back to World War I, in fact, going back to the Spanish Civil War, that is the taking of Cuba, the sinking of USS Maine, that became the excuse for the Americans to attack Cuba in 1898, was all orchestrated. Those of you who are familiar with the movie Citizen Kane, one of the great movie, Orson Welles, there's a famous line. Orson Welles plays the role. He's Citizen Kane. But that Citizen Kane is modeled on William Randolph Hearst, who was the mega newspaper owner, publisher, just as is Rupert Murdoch of Fox News and Wall Street Journal and so on. So at that time, there is no television. There's radio has not yet come about. It is the paper. And William Randolph Hearst was the mega owner. And there's a famous line in there where Citizen Kane, Orson Welles, is telling his editors, we want a war. And they say, sir, we can have a war. He said, you don't have to worry about it. You give the script and I will give you the war.
Right. 100%.
Right? So that's and that was the war, that was the Cuban War. Okay, so we have to go back. We have to put it, because these are all bankers' war and these are all warmongers' war. That is what President Eisenhower in 1961, when he was leaving the White House, warned the American people about, that you have to be careful, otherwise you will be taken over by the military-industrial complex.
Right.
Today, 60 plus years later, we can say military industrial big pharma complex.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So we go back to Yitzhak Rabin and the period when he came into office, which was in 1980s, late 1980s. And what was happening in 1980s? Very, very, very quickly. In the 1980s, there was the Iran-Iraq war going on. Saddam Hussein had attacked Iran after Iran had its revolution that overthrew the Shah, who was an American agent, an American puppet who had been brought to power in 1952 after he had run away by the CIA by doing a coup. So the Shah of Iran was overthrown in a revolution, and the religious leader Ayatollah Khomeini came to power, and Saddam Hussein attacked Iran, and that war was a war of almost a decade. Saddam Hussein attacked Iran because Iran, the people of Iran, the students, the Revolutionary Guard, they seized the American diplomats as hostages. If you remember, if you can recall, this is 1979, they were seized, Again, it's a dog's breakfast. It's so complex. 79, the American hostage began. 1980 was the election year. Jimmy Carter tried to send in paratroopers in helicopter. Those helicopters crashed in the desert, and that whole enterprise, military crashed and failed. The hostages are still in Iran. The election campaign is going on, and Saddam Hussein attacks Iran. Saddam is a CIA asset.
Right.
People have forgotten that because that has been airbrushed away. Saddam came to power as a CIA asset, a military man. Oh, sorry, the military came, and he was a civilian who put on the military dress, the Baath Party. Now, so the war is going on. The hostage crisis is there. Then what happens is Israel launches an attack on Lebanon, and a Lebanese war breaks out. And to bring this all together, the election result, President Carter is defeated and Ronald Reagan comes to power. And so from the Israeli point of view, Ronald Reagan is more pro-Israel than is Jimmy Carter. That's from the Israeli point of view. From the American point of view, the Israelis are the only democracy in the Middle East. Everybody else is a gangster, and so we stand with Israel. Despite the fact that the Shah of Iran had been an American asset, Saddam Hussein is an American asset, the Lebanese leaders are an American asset, Saudi Arabia is an American asset, but all of that doesn't matter. It is what the media tells you.
Right.
So there's a Lebanese war has begun. The general of the Israeli army is who goes into Lebanon is Ariel Sharon, who later on becomes the prime minister. And in all of this complex situation, the Palestinian resistance is trying to fight the invading Israeli army. There is a Lebanese army that is asking for the American help to keep everybody apart. The American sends a naval fleet, sends in the Marine, and the Marines are blown up in the famous suicide bomb operation. 241 Marines are blown up. This is in 1981. President Reagan, he's just become the president. He has this mess in his hand. He orders the American fleet to withdraw. The Israelis engage with the Iranians. Just imagine, Israelis engage with the Iranians because Iranians are desperate for weapons to fight Iraq, and President Reagan authorizes Israel to sell American weapons that Israel has to Iran, because all of the Iranian arms, that is the airplanes, the tanks, and everything else, are American made because that was supplied to the Shah. So the Israelis now start supplying, with the permission of the president, arms and equipment to Iran. And that money that Israel is getting, the president's people ask them, now you send part of that money back to America, underground, because at that time, again, all of this is in 1981, 82. A war breaks out in Nicaragua with the Sandinistas taking power, the Contras. And the U.S. Congress has an amendment, the Bolin Amendment, that without the permission of the Congress, America cannot export arms or money to any country, especially in the hemisphere, the American hemisphere. So a president cannot authorize arms sale and arms shipment to the Contras in Nicaragua. So what he does, or what his people does, Reagan might be sleeping, what his people does, Oliver North, John Poindexter, and others, Caspar Weinberger, they get the Israelis to sell American weapons that Israelis have to the Iranians. The money then is sent to America, laundered through America to Nicaragua. and that breaks out in the Iran-Contra scandal. It's a massive scandal, and it's only lucky that President Reagan did not get impeached and he survived that scandal. In the midst of all of that is the Lebanese war, and Israel uses that opportunity to take out the Iraqi nuclear reactor that had been provided to Iraq by the French, Osirak. This is the 1982 bombing of Osirak reactors taken out. This further flares up the situation. And the long and the short of it, a new resistance is born as a result of this war in Lebanon. Another religious that is called the Hezbollah.
Yes.
And the Hezbollah starts fighting the Israeli Defense Forces, guerrilla operation, because these are militia, these are young people joining in Lebanon. So the birth of Hezbollah takes place as a result of the invasion of Lebanon by the Israeli armed forces in the 1981-82 calendar. All right, so that leads to, in 1983-84, in that time frame, the Israeli Defense Forces under Ariel Sharon surrounds the refugee camp of the Palestinians in Beirut. It's called Sabra and Shatila. And while they surround this camp, their Lebanese ally, the militia of the Christian Phalangists, the Christian Phalangists are the fascists.
Okay.
Going all the way back, phalange means fascist, going all the way back to Second World War, because they were connected with Mussolini. They're Roman Catholic, they're Arabs.
Makes sense.
But they're not Muslim, and so this is the intra-religious communal warfare. So the phalange, their leader was Bashir Gemayel. There is going to be an election in 1983, and Bashir is running for the presidency, but he is the leader of the Phalange militia. His militia, under the protection of the Israeli Defense Forces, goes into Sabra and Shatila refugee camp, and they massacre over 900 Palestinian women and children.
Right.
All right? So the counter response to that is suicide bombers from Hezbollah and the Palestinian. They penetrate the Phalange and they bomb, and in that bombing, Bashir Gemayel dies. And so there's further escalation of the conflict. Later on, his brother Amin Gemayel becomes the president of Lebanon when the election is eventually held. So this is the early 80s. After the Sabra and Shatila massacre, Menachem Begin, as the prime minister, cannot go on anymore. The outrage is so immense, that I was then, in graduate school. I was, of course, following all of these things, in Toronto. The worldwide, outrage. There's war going on in Africa with the African National Congress, the Liberation War in Southern Africa, in Rhodesia, in Mozambique, and so on and so forth, in Angola, and here in Middle East. And the outrage led to the loss of, in a vote of confidence, a loss for Menachem Begin. Ariel Sharon had to withdraw. Menachem Begin lost his prime ministership. Ariel Sharon was cashiered by the Israeli military for what he had done. That means it was under his command, and he was removed from the military. General Ariel Sharon was thrown out of the military. He's lucky that he did not go into prison. He became the leader. When Menachem Begin resigned, he became the leader of the Likud party, the party of Bibi Netanyahu today.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the right-wing party.
Yeah.
And he is known as the butcher of Beirut. Okay, so there was the baby killing. It's all on record. So what happens then, in Israel itself, because there's the West Bank and the Gaza, these are the Palestinian, It's under the control of the. Well, there's a resistance movement there. They're outraged with what has happened. Women and children have been massacred. Yasser Arafat is alive, and so this outrage transmutes into an uprising called the Intifada. The Egyptians are watching all of this because the Egyptians had made a peace treaty with Israel. That was Anwar Sadat in 1979, and then Anwar Sadat got killed in 1981. So there is no more Anwar Sadat. They're the man who made peace with Israel. Hosni Mubarak is the president, and they don't want to interfere, and they will not interfere, just as they don't want to interfere today. So they're watching it. And an uprising begins in West Bank, the Intifada. Okay, it runs for roughly 3 years, 86, 87, 88. It's a massive uprising. It's an internal guerrilla fighting, and it is heavily repressed by the Israeli Defense Forces. All right, so they crush it. The first Intifada is crushed. Arafat is not inside Palestine now. He's still outside. His base of operation is in Tunisia. So now Israelis have a huge problem in their hand. Menachem Begin is gone. Sharon is in the opposition. They've had a blackface as a result of what happened in Sabra and Shatila. There's a public relation disaster. Ronald Reagan's is now gone. The 1988 election, George Herbert Walker Bush is the president. And the question is, for the Israelis, how they're going to deal with the Palestinians.
Right.
See, because at that time in 1988, the UN Security Council resolution is the only resolution upon which any action can be taken. And the UN Security Council resolution 242 basically declares that Israel has to withdraw from the occupied territories, including Jerusalem, that was captured or taken in the 1967 war for peace. And that's a resolution that is signed by all the 5 veto powers, United States, Britain. So there can be no move to go around UN Security Council 242. So the long and the short of it, the Israeli intelligence at this time, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin becomes the prime minister, and he's the prime minister. But it is the intelligence forces comes up with the idea that we should create an organization that will be so fanatically determined in their agenda, in their constitution, to destroy Israel. Their constitution will call for the complete destruction of Israel, no compromise. We create such an organization in the name of Hamas that will outflank Arafat's Al-Fatah, which is the PLO. Now, PLO and Al-Fatah are secular organizations. They are not religious organizations, because the members of the PLO comes from all the various religious groups among Palestinians. That is, Orthodox Christians, Druze, Sunni are the majority, but Christian both on the Orthodox side church, on the Protestant side church, they all come together. If people want to refresh their memory, the first terrorist operations by the PLO was done by Christian Palestinians. That was under the banner of Palestinian Liberation Front, PFLP, Palestinian Popular Liberation Front, which was a member of PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, that is the umbrella organization. Al-Fatah was one organization that was run by Arafat. The PFLP was run by a man named George Habash. George Habash was an Orthodox Christian. The first woman terrorist who became an iconic figure around the world when it happened, around the world in the third world, was a woman by the name of Laila Khaled. Laila Khaled was a Christian woman, when they hijacked British Airways plane and brought it to Lebanon and blew it up. So the Israeli intelligence came up with the proposition, and that's what they implemented. They created this organization. What organization? Hamas. Hamas was created in late 1988, 1989. Okay, and they wrote up their charter, and they became and they financed them. They helped them create clubs for the youth to do the recruitment. They helped them establish their own mosque centers, all in the occupied territories.
Right.
But the main purpose was that this Hamas, based in the West Bank, Arafat is in Tunisia. He was in Lebanon, but because of all the various conflict, he had to move out. The UN pushed him out to Tunisia. He boarded UN ship with all his men, soldiers, and went to Tunisia. And his base became in Tunisia, Tunis. So he is over 1,500 miles away from Palestine, from Israel.
Right.
So inside Israel is Hamas created. This Hamas raises his flag, does his dirty job, attacks, all in the name of Islam. This is the Islamist organization. The parallel of this is what was created by the Americans in Afghanistan, the Taliban. The money that flowed in to create the Taliban
as a resistance to the Soviets.
To the Soviet, when the Soviets went into Afghanistan in 1979. I mean, that was another 10-year war, from 79 to 1988. And the Soviets then withdrew. But the people who fought that were the Taliban, and the Talibans were joined by fighters from across North Africa and the Middle East, and among them was a young man called Osama bin Laden. Right? And Osama bin Laden was recruited, and he founded Al-Qaeda. And that recruitment led to Al-Qaeda being the organization to do the 9/11.
Right.
Okay. And when 9/11 was done, 9/11 became the pretext to go to war against Iraq and Afghanistan. And Iraq was flattened.
Right.
Right. There were other wars in between, but that was the 2003 war on the argument that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. But the weapons of mass destruction, that's nuclear weapons, so-called making of nuclear weapon, Israelis had destroyed the Osirak reactor in 1982.
Right.
When Reagan was the president. See, people's memories forgotten. All we have to do is smoke a few what our friend, Hunter Biden smokes, heroin or whatever it is, smoke a few of that, and it's all forgotten. We're now in a new page, in a new era. So the argument that was presented, even though the United Nations Special Commission on Iraq, a 10-year investigation after the first Gulf War in 1992, gave the blank statement, unambiguous statement, Iraq has no weapons of mass destruction. The man who led that United Nations Special Commission is Scott Ritter, the American, weapons inspector and U.S. Marine Corps major. He's alive. He's writing about it. Yesterday, he published on a Substack an article that everybody should read. It's called I no longer stand with Israel. He stood with Israel. He defended Israel in the 1992 war and in the 2003 war. And yet George Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Colin Powell went to the United Nations Security Council claiming that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and therefore if it does not come clean, then there has to be a regime change. And when they did not get the vote in the Security Council, they went ahead unilaterally, because in the Security Council, Russia, China, and France would not vote for the motion.
Right.
So they went unilaterally. That is, Tony Blair and George Bush went unilaterally into Iraq. A 15-year warfare, over $7 trillion expended. 7,000 American soldiers dead and wounded, and over 1 million or more Iraqis dead.
Right.
Right. So Back to Israel, Hamas has been created. Yitzhak Rabin is the prime minister. The first Gulf War in 1992, when President George Bush 41, after the war, announced the New World Order, what he also called for was a Madrid conference. Madrid conference that he called for and was attended by Gorbachev. And when Gorbachev stepped down, Yeltsin, the Madrid conference was a conference for the Middle East to bring together the Arabs and Jews, Palestinians and Israelis on a platform. The conference was held in Madrid, supported by the European Community, the United Nations Security Council, under the leadership of the US President. And they came up with what is the Oslo Accord.
Right.
The Oslo Accord. I have the whole entire documents of the Oslo Accord over here, the government documents. This was negotiated in 1993 when George Bush lost the presidency and Bill Clinton became the president. And in October of 1993, in the White House, Yitzhak Rabin came accompanied by his foreign minister Shimon Peres and Arafat, and in the White House they sat down, they signed the Oslo Accord, they shook hands, just as in 1979 under Jimmy Carter, President Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin came together, shook hands, and signed the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty and exchanged ambassadors. Oslo Accord was designed to bring these two people together, Palestinian and Israelis, that they had negotiated an agreement, among them, with the help of the Americans and the Norwegians. The Norwegians were the actual brokers, not Canada, by the way. We never participated in it. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney was there, but nobody invited Canada to participate. They signed the agreement, and the fundamental issue about the Oslo Agreement was, though it was to protect the Israelis, and the Palestinians were not happy about it, that is, the leadership, Yasser Arafat was not happy about it, but they signed it. The agreement was based upon UN Security Council Resolution 242, recognizing the occupied territories which were taken by Israel in the 1967 war, will be incrementally, in stages, turned over to the Palestinians to establish a Palestinian autonomous state. It would not be done overnight. It will be done on stages. The reason being, the formula was that the stages is the confidence building measure. The first stage would be the Palestinians would be given villages and small towns or cities in the West Bank and Gaza, handed it over to them to administer and run those places. And then there would be the balance that would be left. It would be designated as one. In the second stage, it would be run by the Palestinians and Israelis together, administered together. They were called the B territories. The C territories were the ones which Israelis would be holding on, and as the smooth transfer progressed, finally the C territories would be handed over to the Palestinians. So in stages, with full partnership, each side working it out, and what is called confidence building measures, the Palestinians would eventually, under supervision by the United Nations, by the European Commission, and of course by the Israelis and other Arab states, eventually will become an independent autonomous state. And then those final negotiations will happen, about banking and military and so on and so forth. But this was the opening shot. They signed the agreement.
Mm.
All right. Arafat was not happy because he wanted a much faster timetable
Sure.
for movement. But after signing that, the Israelis agreed under the American authority that Arafat will move from Tunis in Tunisia to Palestine. So he arrived in Palestine, that is occupied territories, and he finally made his base in Ramallah. Ramallah is outside of Jerusalem in the West Bank. So Arafat was back finally he was back in Palestine. But Hamas had been created,
Right.
outflank him by the rhetoric of extremism and playing upon the frustration and anger and grievances of those Palestinians who are being daily abused, by the occupation forces. All right. But on the other side of the equation, the right-wing settlers movement, supported by the Likud party, Ariel Sharon was the leader at that time. But he was not in government, as far as my memory serves, or he was being supported by his deputy, who was Benjamin Netanyahu, and they started escalating the rhetoric and the argument that Rabin had sold out Israel.
Right. Sure.
Okay, and Rabin was another general. He was the chief. He had been the chief of staff of the Israeli forces in 1967 war. He had served as the ambassador in the United States, and then he went back, and after he stepped down from the army, he became a member of the parliament, and eventually the leader of the Labour Party, and now he was the prime minister. But the attack upon him was orchestrated that he had sold out the Israelis, the Zionist project, by coming to this agreement. So well and good, he had sold out. But the rhetoric was so inflammatory that in 1995, in November, on the first anniversary of the signing of the Oslo Accord, there was a massive peace demonstration in Tel Aviv, the Peace Square, and Rabin went to address that rally of something like 100,000 Israelis in that rally. And his security detail was, penetrated by these right-wing Jews, and Yigal Amir killed him, shot him dead. All right? So, Anwar Sadat was shot dead by the Islamists.
Yep.
Another Islamist party, the Hamas, was created by the Israelis, and Yitzhak Rabin was shot. So from 1995 to where we are right now, the Oslo Accord died.
Right.
Because there was no one to implement it. Mr. Netanyahu was not going to implement it. Ariel Sharon, he finally collapsed in a coma, and he became a state of vegetable from about, I don't know exact date, but somewhere around about 2000 till he died sometime in 2015, 2016. But for over 10 years, he was in coma, plugged in, he was being sustained and kept alive. And the world turned away.
Right.
There were many other wars for the bankers to profit from. There was the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Serbian War, the Kosovo War, the Rwanda crisis, etc., till we come to the
all orchestrated.
The whole issue about where we are with the UN global agenda, but the fire was burning in Palestine.
Right.
And it was burning to the advantage of the right-wing group, of which Bibi Netanyahu is the leader. And by the way, the killing of um, Yitzhak Rabin in 1995, the blood of Yitzhak Rabin is in the hand of Rabin. It is an Israeli, those Israelis who are, you might call them left wing, you might call them on the center. That means those Israelis who are anti-Likud, that means anti-religious party, they hold Bibi Netanyahu as the man responsible for the death of their hero, that is Yitzhak Rabin. My point is that agreement, if implemented, and should have been implemented because all of these countries had signed on to it, and most importantly, United States was the host country, Russia had signed on, China had signed on, and other Arab states had signed on, and if it was implemented, by now there would be some sort of an autonomous Palestinian state. Right? But that did not happen. What happened was the land that was designated, the occupied territory that was designated for the Palestinian independent state, became more and more colonized by the settlers.
Right.
So where are the Palestinians going to go? So they were being squeezed in refugee camps and in their own little settlements that were being slowly taken away. This is the horror story that the people in the West do not know.
Right.
I have been to those areas. I walked in those places. I have sat and talked with Israelis and Palestinians. I'm not an Arab. I'm a Canadian of Indian origin.
Right.
I happen to be a Muslim or of Muslim origin. I have prayed in the Holy Sepulchre. I have sat with the people in Holy Sepulchre. And I have wandered around the Via Dolorosa and all of that. And then I've gone to places in Tel Aviv and Haifa, in Nablus, in Hebron. And not once, but twice. And it was done all on my own personal account.
Right.
Because I wanted to know the situation.
So, Salim, I wonder Lou Rockwell wrote a really good piece that you sent me. I wonder if you can touch on that as to how the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers play into all of this.
So that is the background, and this thing that erupted by Hamas. Just to wrap it up, just as Osama bin Laden was the patsy for the intelligence operation, in which, by the way, the Mossad was involved, just as Lee Harvey Oswald was the patsy for the murder of John F. Kennedy, nobody believed. Anybody with common sense, forget about historical knowledge, believed that Lee Harvey Oswald killed President Kennedy. Right. He was a patsy. Just as the Lusitania was a patsy for World War I, and Pearl Harbor was a patsy for World War II for the Americans, we have this situation where the Hamas serves as the patsy for the Zionists, the extreme right wing. Whenever they need to have a argument, a pretext for military operation, Hamas provides it to them.
Right.
Okay, so the common average Palestinian men, women, and children of all ages, and by the way, 2.3 million Palestinian in Gaza, 50% of that 2.3 million are people under 18 years old. Think about that. They're living in an open air concentration camp. Right? And this genocidal bombing are being done by the people who claim that they were the victims of Nazi Holocaust. Right? So these are huge.
Give them the right to do what they're going to do to Palestinians.
That's right. So it's the huge irony and smoke and mirror game going on. Right. Now, so let me step back. How this is a globalist agenda, bankers' agenda. Well, people should know, and those who do know will recognize that the Zionist project began with Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl is, in that sense, the father of Zionism. Theodor Herzl was a European Jew born in Vienna in the 1800s, 1860 to be exact. He died in 1904. Pardon?
Would it be Khazarian Jew?
Khazarian Jew. The European Jews are Khazarian Jews. They're Ashkenazim.
Right.
If you spell out the word Ashkenazim, then the word Nazi is embedded in Ashkenazim.
Right. Right.
So Theodor Herzl was born in 1860. He was a Viennese Jew, and he died in 1904. He's the man who wrote the manifesto of Israel called The Jewish State. Here is the book, The Jewish State. All right? He argued that the Jews of Europe, he was not talking about the Jews outside of Europe. He had no idea of Jews outside of Europe, that is, Jews of North Africa, Jews of Yemen, Jews of Ethiopia, Jews of India. By the way, there was a very big Jewish community population in India. In the city that I was born, Calcutta, had a very large, significant population of Baghdadi Jews, Jews from Babylon, that is Baghdad in modern terms, Mesopotamia. And just for an interest sake for people, one of the Indian generals in the war of 1971 that helped liberate East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, where there was a genocide conducted by the Pakistan army. Over 3 million people died. I was a teenager in 1971. It is as a result of the 71 war and genocide that I ended up in Canada, because I became a refugee with my mother and my siblings. There were 10 million people that became refugees. I was only fortunate that as a refugee, I found shelter in my grandparents' home, because India was divided. So my parents' generation, before I was born, they left India when India was divided. And then I had to leave as a teenager in my late teen years as a refugee back to India, and from India to Canada. So the general who led the Indian army in the war with Pakistan was a Jew from Baghdad who was born in India, that is in the Baghdadi Jews or Babylonian Jews who had settled in India. And he was born in Calcutta. His name was, at that time, he was a Major General Raphael Jacob. Major General Raphael Jacob died as a full general in India, is buried in India. The Bollywood, which is the Indian Hollywood, which is even bigger than the Hollywood in Hollywood in San Francisco, the Bollywood, they were financed and supported by Indian Jews. So the contribution of Jews in India is very significant in history. But then when 1948 happened, many of them packed and left for their own reason. There was no pogroms or anti-Semitism in India. I did not grow up in an anti-Semitic society. Right. So Herzl, it's a small book. It's like the Communist Manifesto of Engels, Marx and Engels. It's barely 100 pages. Herzl charged that the Jews suffer from bigotry and prejudice, which is the most ancient bigotry and prejudice of the Christian toward Jews, anti-Semitism. This is European Jews. They are the victims of anti-Semitism, and the way anti-Semitism problem can be resolved is if the countries of the powers in Europe, they find for the Jews of Europe a land where they can go and colonize, then it will be of benefit to both the Europeans and to the Jews, European Jews. The source of the problem, anti-Semitism, which is European Jews, will be removed from the European society, and the Jews will no longer be the Jewish question, which Marx had raised, for the Europeans. They will be out of Europe.
Go ahead, Salim.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So I just want to, I mean, from this passage, I just want to answer the big question about the Jewish Zionist project as the bankers' project. I want to read a passage, just a few sentences, to give you the flavor of what Herzl is writing. Herzl is writing Palestine or Argentina, and he says, "Shall we choose Palestine or Argentine? We shall take with us what is given to us and what is selected by Jewish public opinion. The society will determine both these points." And so he carries on, and then he points out, if His Majesty, the Sultan, that is the Sultan of the Turks, who were the Ottoman Empire, were to give us Palestine, we could in return undertake to regulate the whole finances of Turkey. We should there form a portion of a rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. So, in his argument, we will be the vanguard of Europe in Asia or in Latin America, Argentina, and we will bring European civilization to the barbarians. So people of India, of Middle East, of Latin America, we are barbarians. Well, didn't you hear recently Bibi Netanyahu saying that these are subhuman people?
Yep.
Well, this is the Nazi language. This is the oldest language, and that's, I'm reading to you from Herzl. Now, Herzl died in 1904. The project was started, but he died in 1904. And the project was sleeping. There was nobody going to give him anything. Herzl had gone and met the Pope. Herzl had gone and met the Sultan, the Caliph. Nobody was going to pay. This is as if it was a mad idea, you know. So now you have to fast forward to World War I. World War I comes along, and Britain and France, they're scrounging for money, and that is why they wanted America to come into the war. They need the money. They need the banks to finance the war. They come up with the idea that if we win the war, if we defeat the Turkish Empire, Ottoman Turkey was allied with Germany, and Austro-Hungarian Empire in World War I, if we defeat them, we will carve those areas. You know, there's oil, there's other resources. We will carve those areas. The Suez Canal was owned by the European bankers, the Rothschilds and others, and it was in the control of the British. We will parcel these things to those people or those organizations that joins us, and we support them. And it is in that context that Arthur Balfour wrote this letter called the Balfour Declaration on behalf of the British War Cabinet. The Prime Minister was Lloyd George. Arthur Balfour had served as the Prime Minister. He was a conservative Prime Minister. Lloyd George was a liberal Prime Minister. During the war, it was a united government. It was a national union government. So the conservatives and the liberals were both involved, as was Churchill. Churchill was a minister for the Navy, the First Lord of the Admiralty. And on the authorization of the British War Cabinet, Arthur Balfour wrote the letter, the famous letter, Balfour Declaration, and it was addressed to It was not addressed to any Zionist organization, Mark. It was not addressed to the man who would later on become the second leader of the Zionist organization after the death of Theodor Herzl. It was written to Lord Rothschild.
Of course it was.
It was written to Lord, and that's what he says. It is one of the shortest letter with one of the most dangerous consequences that we are now faced with and have been faced with over the century. The date of the letter is November 2nd, 1917. I have it right in front of me. So I will just read to you. Dear Lord Rothschild, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. And it goes on. So there you have it. The Balfour Declaration sent to Lord Rothschild to get the banks to keep financing the war. Woodrow Wilson joins the effort after he declares war, after the Lusitania thing. And this is the globalist project.
Right.
The slogan of this globalist project was provided by a man by the name of Israel Zangwill. Israel Zangwill was a writer, thinker, journalist, like Theodor Herzl had been a writer, journalist. Israel Zangwill, a European Jew, was similarly a writer, a journalist, and he came across from Europe to New York. So he was living in New York, and at the time of the Balfour Declaration, he coined the famous slogan, a land for a people in a land without people.
Mm. Right.
So the Jews are people without land. In Palestine, there is land without people. So they declared Palestine an empty place.
Right.
I mean, that's what the globalists can do. They can declare whatever they want. So land without people, Palestine, for a people without a land, that is Jews of Europe. All right. And then after the war, under the British, the colonization process began.
Right.
And what becomes Israel is a colonial settler state. Now,
so Rothschilds would be a Khazarian Jew?
Yeah, very much a Khazarian Jew.
Okay.
Now you might want to ask, who are the Khazarian Jews?
Yes.
So again, a thumbnail sketch of what is Khazarian Jews. It goes back to the 6th, 7th century. The waves of Mongol hordes and people connected with that, the nomadic tribes of Eurasia, that is, China, Mongolia, in modern time, Kazakhstan, Siberia. That invasion began, or movement of people began in the 6th century as the Roman Empire was falling and collapsing. One of the first conquests by the nomads was that of Attila the Huns. Who were the Huns? They were the nomads of Asia. Right. All right. So there were these waves of movement. The biggest wave was the Mongol leader Genghis Khan, Tamerlane. So these hordes swept across from Inner Asia, from Mongolia, across the steppes, across Russia. There was no Russia at that time.
Right.
But it was in the stages that it would later on come to formation across. And then they retreated. They are nomadic people. They retreated. They devastated the parts of Europe where they had come to. They almost overran Italy. They invaded Rome, Byzantium, and so on. And then after the raiding was over, they were horsemen. They were nomads. They were shepherds. etc., they retreated. But as they retreated back to their own homeland, they left behind pockets and pockets and pockets of tribes.
Sure.
Their ethnicity of these pockets of tribes in Hungary, in Romania, modern day Hungary, modern day Romania, Lithuania, the Baltic area, Finland, and then Russia, and so on. These were people that were left behind by these nomadic invaders. They settled, they became Christians in due time of assimilation, because the nomads brought their culture, but their culture was not superior to the culture of Europe at that time, the Roman culture and so on and so forth, or the Arab culture, the Ottoman culture. Oh, the Ottomans were not there at that time, but the Arab culture, the Persian culture. So while they defeated them and they settled there, the superior culture took it over, and assimilated them. And so the Hungarians are the remnants of the Magyar Turks today. They in fact speak a dialect of the Magyar Turks. Same thing to do with the Slovaks, same thing to do with the Finns, the Ukrainians, and so on and so forth. So they became, in these areas, they were converted to Christianity. But near the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, and further east of the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, the conversion that took place was into Islam.
Okay.
So the modern day Turks are Muslims, right? Whereas the modern day Hungarians are Christian, Orthodox, or Catholics. But in between these two great empires, the Christian Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Byzantine Empire that was Christian, we're going back to the 6th, 7th century, and on the other side was the rising Arab Islamic empires, Arab and Persian. In between were those Khazars who neither converted to Christianity nor converted to Islam. They opted for a third path. And the third part was conversion to Judaism.
Right.
Okay. Why Judaism? Because, and these are all in the literature, because by converting to Judaism, they were going to maintain their limited autonomy. Because if they converted to Christianity, they would go under the control of Constantinople or Rome. If they converted to Islam, they would go into the control of Baghdad, right, which was the center at that time, Damascus and Baghdad of the Islamic civilization. So to maintain their semi-autonomous status, they converted to Judaism. So there was a Khazar dynasty kingdom in the 7th, 8th, 9th centuries. For 300 years, there was a Khazar kingdom, a Jewish kingdom, and they were trading in between the Byzantines and the Persians and the Arabs. And then what happened is the rise of the Duchy of Muscovy. This Muscovy, which was just a small island of a state, a duchy, started expanding and becoming stronger and stronger. And at the same time, the Orthodox Church came into Kiev Rus, which is modern day Kiev, and they established the Orthodox Church. And Kiev Rus became the foundation of what would later on become the Russian Empire in the 11th century onwards. People like Ivan the Terrible and the czars that followed. And so with the rise of the Duchies of Muscovy over the next 150, 200 years, as they grew stronger and they expanded eastward and westward, they swallowed up the Khazar kingdom. The Khazar kingdom was integrated by conquest into the rising Russian Empire. And the Khazarians were left with the option to convert into Christianity, become part of the Orthodox Church, or they could maintain their own identity, but they would be scattered in the empire. They had lost their power, so they became traders, and they became craftsmen, and so on and so forth, and they survived. They grew in population, in number, but they survived as a minority within the Russian Empire that came about. The Russian Empire extended all the way into what later on became Poland. There was the Lithuanian Empire, then there was a Polish kingdom. Russia took it all over by the time of Catherine the Great. The long and the short of this fascinating history is the Khazarian Jews had lost whatever was their power until the 9th century. And now they were people of Eastern Europe. They were just another minority people among so many minority people, like the Mennonites, like the Anabaptists, and so on and so forth. So there you have these people. Then comes the modern age of nationalism after the French Revolution, and the ideas of nationalism and the making of the nation state, France and Spain and Italy, and the movements that take place. That is the situation in the 19th century. Remember, 19th century, there is no Germany. It is only towards the end of the third part of 1970, that is actually 1868, that Prussia, under Bismarck, united all the various principalities of Germany to become Germany, under Emperor Wilhelm I. So in this process, our friend Theodor Herzl, and there are other Jewish voices too, but Theodor Herzl becomes the most prominent because he's now known as now the father of Israel, proposed this project, the Jewish state, and it would be bankrolled by the Rothschild family, bankers, and the cabal of bankers, that had been financing just about every king, every kingdom, and so on and so forth. So that was the project. And anybody outside it, this is the age of European colonialism.
Right.
A country with a population of 10 million had taken over 1/4 of the world. That is, England was running an empire from Australia through India, Middle East, into Canada.
Sure.
Right? How was it running it? Through their agents. The only agent that broke away from the British crown and the bankers were the 13 colonies. That's the Revolutionary War of 1776.
Right.
So this is the agenda. This is the globalist agenda. The reincarnation of this globalist agenda through the period that we're talking about, late 19th century through World War I, the making of the League of Nations, the making of the banks, on and on into our time.
World War II, United Nations. Yep.
Exactly. Here, we're trying to cover a lot of ground, and we have possibly gone over the time. But just I want to show you, my friends, here it is. Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler.
Right.
Okay. Documented by archival sources of how Wall Street and London financed the making of Hitler, of the Nazi Party, Then, simultaneously, here's account again with archival sources, Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution.
Right. They're funding both sides.
Of course, bankers' wars.
Naturally.
Right? So J.P. Morgan, Rothschild, Rockefeller, Lehman Brothers, all of these banks, and then the powerful oligarchs of that time, the DuPonts, the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts, they and their banking influences, they were promoting and investing in Europe through the oligarchs in Europe. So it is again the fusion. What today our friend I say that facetiously, Klaus Schwab talks about stakeholder capitalism,
Right.
right? So who were the stakeholder capitalism of the end of 19th century and beginning of the 20th century? Ford Motor.
Mm.
Henry Ford was the biggest supporter of German Nazism,
Right.
right?
Yep.
The DuPonts, they were in league with IG Farben, the biggest German, chemical industry, Siemens, and so
Klaus,
on and so
Klaus
forth.
Klaus Schwab's father.
Yeah, exactly. On the money flowing into the Bolshevik side, that is where again people forget that the Bolsheviks, the vast majority of the senior leadership, that is the Politburo and the Central Committee, more than 50% of the members of the Central Committee and the Politburo were East European Jews.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
The man who organized the financing of the Bolsheviks was a man by the name of Armand Hammer, the Hammer Petroleum.
Mm.
It is fascinating as you read these things. Armand Hammer, that's the name. Now, if you break up the name, it is Arm, ARM,
Yeah.
and AND, and Hammer, HAMMER. Well, what is Arm and Hammer the symbol of? The Russian Communist Party symbols, the sickle and the hammer.
Hammer and sickle. Yep.
Hammer and sickle, exactly. Arm and Hammer was from Belarusia.
Mm.
Most of these people, all of them are either from Belarus or from Ukraine or from the inner part of Russia. They are the ones who organize the communist revolution, the Bolshevik revolution, with the help of the finance provided to them by the American Wall Street and London Wall Street, and during the war by the Germans, the First World War, by the Germans, to defeat the Tsar. Not, the Tsar was not a liberal Democrat, he was a Tsar.
Right.
But he was not a communist. So the Tsar was overthrown. So you fast forward this into the Middle East, and there you have their satellites that has controlled the area. And so this colonial settler state was launched and established in the Middle East. And the Khazarian Jews are talking about anti-Semitism. More and more people are going to be asking now, how can you be an anti-Semite against a Khazar? A Khazar originates in Asia.
Right.
In fact, Stalin gave the Khazarian Jews a homeland for them if they would accept it. And that homeland was Kazakhstan, and the capital of that homeland would be Astana. Well, there is Kazakhstan and there is Astana, but it is not Jewish because the Jews of Eastern Europe refused. They were going to take Rothschild's money to go to Palestine.
Right.
Okay? So, obviously, there would be resistance of the indigenous people. Jews and, Arabs, Christians and Muslims. Who are the Arab Christians in Palestine? Well, they are the immediate descendants of the first Christians in Palestine. Right. Who were the first followers of Jesus? Right? When Jesus walked in the Holy Land, there was no Muslim, there was no Christian. Jesus was preaching, or Jesus was talking to the Jews who rejected him. But those Jews who accepted him and then followed him became Christians. They are the Semites.
Right.
The Arabs are Semites. So here comes the Khazarian Jews claiming they have a 3,000-year right to Palestine. And a whole history was created to supply the argument that the Jews of Europe are the displaced people 2,000 years ago by the Romans from Palestine. Whereas the facts are, and these can be now biologically tested, the DNA can be tested. There is no trace of Semitism in them. They're not
Right.
Semites, they're Khazarian Jews. Bibi Netanyahu is a Khazarian Jew. And Bibi Netanyahu is committing genocide. He's leading a genocide against the native people.
Right.
And what we have in the West, in the collective West, again, as a result of the propaganda, the mouthpiece being the mainstream media, what we have is the idea that we in the West, the Christians of the West, we did a horrible deed. We committed a Holocaust, and therefore we have to compensate the people against whom we committed a Holocaust by supporting them and helping them build their state, which is a return of those Jews who were exiled by the Romans.
Right.
This is as phenomenal a hoax as is George Orwell's story in 1984.
Right.
The Ministry of Truth lies, writes up the manifesto, which is full of lies
Right.
or questionable data. But these things could not be said before because the context was missing. Now the people, if they want to connect the dots, can see that this is the continuing war of globalization, of globalism, and that war is to construct what you and I have talked about over the past years, one world government based upon rule-based order, not on international law, not on a negotiated agreement with others, but what Victoria Nuland, now the Deputy Secretary of State, famously said during the Maidan coup, F you, EU. Remember that? That means we don't care for your laws, we don't care for the UN, we don't care for anything. We make the law, we make the rules, you better follow us. And if you're going to object to it, we're going to eliminate you.
Right. And
So
that's
that's
where
what,
for the rest of us.
yeah, and so that's where we have arrived. And this is a discussion that is going to be censored and stamped out because they cannot allow this discussion, open discussion and examination. I have only shared a thumbnail sketch, and according to the clock, we have gone over 1 hour and 30 minutes,
Yeah.
and it's a thumb scale.
Yes.
I can go into, or if you had time, we can hold a year-long seminar, like in a university, 20 session to talk about these things. The role of Winston Churchill, the role of Truman,
Yes.
the role of all the other vassal rulers of the Middle East,
All puppeted by the bankers.
all done by the bankers.
Yeah.
Because to conduct wars of such mega operation needs finance. Remember the beginning of the British or the English Industrial Revolution that came about, in the 17th, 18th century. The capital of that came from South America.
Right.
The trade, and it was the British Navy that was built at the time of Elizabeth and then carried on, ruled Britannia, the rulers of the wave. Britain would not allow anybody else to have a navy equal to the size of British Navy. That is why another reason there was World War One. So Elizabeth sent out her ships into the Atlantic trade. What was the Atlantic trade? Ships going from Spain and Portugal and Italy to the New World and bringing back the wealth of the New World, whether it was agricultural products, whether it was tobacco leaves, whether all of the agricultural resources, plus the bullions, the golds, the silver, and so on and so forth. And these ships British naval ships that attacked the trading ships, and of course they also carried slaves in them to the New World, to South America and to America. These ships were attacked and seized, and the wealth brought to England, and the captains of the ships were knighted. One of the most famous knight is Sir Francis Drake. What was Sir Francis Drake doing? He was a pirate of the high seas, attacking Spanish galleons, right? So this is the war that went on between these rising new kingdoms in the age of discovery after Columbus set sail in 1492 and the making of modern age. So behind the making of any modernity, any wealth, there is plunder. The most successful power that plunders becomes the leader. Okay? So it was the plunder. Why did the colonies in America, British North America, rose up and revolt? Because they said no taxation without representation. That was the plunder that was going on.
Yes.
It was not simply the Boston Tea Party. There was a whole lot of plundering that was going on.
Sure.
And it was the Boston Tea Party has become now the story, but it was the match that lit the revolution, in the colonies. And then comes only a few years later, 1776 is the war that begins. The 13 colonies are established as a republic with a constitution in 1789, and less than 20 years later, Thomas Jefferson is the president, and Napoleon needs money to finance his wars, the war that will take him for conquering Russia, in 1812. Where will the money come from? Well, part of the money came from by selling the French territories in North America. That's the famous Louisiana purchase by Jefferson in 1804. You see, otherwise, America, what is the United States of America, would be a bilingual country. It would be French and English.
Right.
You see? So these are all complex stories. Each of these complex stories has its own rationale, but the overarching thread that unites all these stories, that connects all these stories, is the financing of these wars.
Yes, 100%.
And the tool for making profits so that the banks will have the money to finance these comes from arms trade, comes from drug trade, the opium wars in China, and it's just about who's who.
Blackmail, extortion.
That's right, and it's going on right now. The whole fentanyl thing. The fentanyl thing is the circular revenge of the Chinese of their opium war by flooding the American market with fentanyl. But the poor people are dying. The people who are doing the trade, they're becoming multi-billionaires.
Right.
Franklin Roosevelt's grandfather, his middle name, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Roosevelt is a Dutch name. The Roosevelt came to America with the Mayflower in the 1680s. New York was New Amsterdam.
Right.
They landed in New Amsterdam. That is the Roosevelt family. They were with the Pilgrim. So one side of his family, the Roosevelt, are Dutch in origin. The other side of his family, that is from his mother's side, they are Delano. Delano is also Dutch. It is a corruption of the word Delanoy. Roosevelt's grandfather, Warren Delano, made his millions in the opium trade in China. So when Roosevelt is the president and he is supporting Chiang Kai-shek, he was far more sensitive about China because his emotions were connected with China. That's where his grandfather made his money. That's where his mother, Sarah Delano, grew up as a child. She grew up in the estate of her father in Hong Kong. See, so once you start penetrating the individuals, look at their history, look at their connection,
Right.
you see the threads coming together.
100%.
And the final on the personality, Churchill's father, Lord Randolph Churchill, belonged to the family. He was a great, great, great grandson of the Duke of Marlborough, who was given the title of Duke by being the general that commanded the British Army along with the French Army in the Battle of Blenheim in Europe that defeated the Prussian kings.
Right.
And that was the title given to him. Now, by the time Churchill is born, the family has the title but has no money.
Right.
So his father, who is elected to the parliament, and because he has the title Lord and Duke of Marlborough, he goes hunting for a wife. And he comes to America. And he marries the daughter of a man by the name of Jerome. His wife was Jenny Jerome. Jerome was a multi-millionaire, just like Roosevelt's grandfather,
Sure.
who had made money in the Eastern trade. That is a nice way of saying Eastern trade is the trade with China, with opiums and teas and so on and so forth.
Sure.
And with that money, he built up his estate in New York, just as Roosevelt's grandfather built up his estate in New York on the Hudson River called Hyde Park. All right? And so Churchill's mother was an American woman. And that's the connection that Churchill would draw upon when he came desperately looking for help from the Americans when America was a neutral country during the Second World War in the 1940s. And that's the connection, the Anglo-American connection. So you look at the families, you look at the connection, you look at the financing,
Yes.
and you have the story. The rest of us are peasants.
Right. As they want us.
As they want, and to be jabbed, to be carried, to be held by our nose and taken along. And so among us, suddenly people feel superior to say, oh, they're barbarians because we are European. Or the other side says, you are barbarian because they're whatever, Arabs and Japanese and so on and so forth.
Right.
This is the perfect game of the globalists.
Yes. To make us all look like slaves and peasants and barbarians.
We are barbarians. It doesn't matter who we are.
Right.
You see, so back to Palestine, back to this, we are seeing a genocide. But the danger of this genocide attack by Bibi Netanyahu is the response that they know. It's like a game of chess. People who don't play chess, they won't understand that when I make a move on the board, I expect you to make the calculated move from the other side.
Reciprocal move, yes.
Yeah, that you will make, and then I will have the counter move. Yeah. So this escalation of mass murder in Gaza is a move on the chessboard of the Middle East, waiting for a response from the Hezbollah.
Yes.
And from the Syrians. They have already bombed the Damascus airport. Israelis have bombed the Damascus airport. That was the news yesterday.
Right.
So these are the provocation, just as the provocation was going on in Ukraine, waiting for these guys to attack. When they attack, immediately these guys will escalate. What is the naval the naval fleet that Americans have sent, Biden has sent? Has he sent them there to do sunbathing? No, he has sent them there to be ready to wait for a pretext so that they can draw in the Iranians into the war.
Right. Absolutely.
And God help us that out of all of this, it escalates to the level of a nuclear warfare.
Right.
It is Putin who has controlled himself. I don't know whether the Lebanese, whether the Syrians, whether the Iranians will be able to control themselves under the provocations.
Right.
because the provocation is the massacring of women and children, all in the name that the Hamas came and massacred Israelis. Now take the story. It's not the story. The fact that was released that there was this music festival, Rav,
Yep.
that they went in. Well, the Rav we now know was scheduled to take place in Tel Aviv, the way up north. Then, in a 48 hours notice, the Rav was moved to the desert near Gaza. And then, in the next 48 hours, it was moved along the walls of Gaza,
Right. Right.
where the young people went. And they were not protected and they were not left with any sort of, security.
Right.
Right? So that was
All
what,
orchestrated.
yeah, that was the bait. That was the bait that was thrown.
Yes. And here we are.
And the media is in full blood, as you can see.
Oh yeah.
There is not a single voice out there saying, hold on, let us examine these things, let us send in independent observers to find out what has happened and what is
No,
happening.
they all push for more violence. They all push for more death.
Absolutely. So now Pierre Polyev and Jagmeet Singh and all of them are standing up that we have to stand with
Eating
civilization.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And the audacity of these people, Jagmeet Singh, for instance, we have normalized the Nazis. We have given them the standing ovation in the House of Commons. We have given them the Order of Canada. Peter Savarin was also a member of the Waffen SS Gazalian Division. He was given the Order of Canada. He was the Chancellor of the University of Alberta. We have the Deputy Prime Minister, who's the granddaughter of a Nazi, high official who was working for Heinrich Himmler. I'm referring to Mikhail Chomiak and his granddaughter Chrystia Phelan. So we have now normalized the Nazis, not only in Canada, in Europe, in America. We have also normalized the gangsters and the thugs and the fascists of the Khalistani Sikh who murdered the Prime Minister of India when the government of Canada was advised. And Jagmeet Singh cannot go to India, but he can be the leader of the third party that is keeping Justin Trudeau in power. Right? We have normalized the fascists among the Sri Lankans who fought a 30-year war, the Tamil Tigers. They are sitting in our parliament, they're members. We have normalized that. Nobody is discussing that. The Tamil Tigers killed another Prime Minister of India, Rajiv Gandhi. The mother, Indira Gandhi, was the Prime Minister killed by the Khalistani. Rajiv Gandhi, who became the Prime Minister following his mother's assassination, was killed by the Tamil Tigers. How many more normalizations of the fashion? We have normalized the Islamists. If you speak against the Islamists, as I did, I'm an Islamophobe. The Islamists are sitting in our parliament. They are cabinet ministers.
Right.
Right? This was done by both the conservative prime ministers, the liberal prime ministers, with the support of the NDP leaders.
Yes.
How much more that is needed for the Canadian people to wake up and say, we are being played, our country is being destroyed, open door migration, multiculturalism, that is the normalization of fascism, we are being played, and anybody who wants to speak about these things is going to be taken down. And in the next election, which is just simply a facade, a play, a joke, we are going to be given the same choices to vote for the same people who brought us the same problem that continues on. It went on through the 20th century, and we're into the third of the 21st century, and it has been going on. When are we going to wake up? Canada. But the rest of the world is waking up. The BRICS nation is breaking away from the West. We haven't talked about that. Tonight we won't, but we have to devote some time to talk about the BRICS.
Another night we'll talk about that. Salim.
Yes, I'm tired.
I just want to thank you. I know you're tired. We've been on for 2 hours. Phenomenal history lesson. And I'm hoping that everybody who's in this room shares this out to expose the information to as many people as absolutely possible. Thank you very much
Well,
for
thank you. This is
putting
this
this
is
into
our
context.
responsibility. I mean,
It
what
is.
is our guiding principle that you and I stood for and fought in 2019?
100%.
It is very simple. It is the architecture of a sane society,
Yes.
which is freedom, responsibility, fairness, and respect.
100%.
When will our Canadian people wake up to their responsibility, save our children, and take back our country from the warmongers and the war profiteers? That is our only prayer.
Yes.
It is not a prayer of a Muslim or a Christian or a Hindu or a Buddhist. It's a prayer of anybody who has humanity.
100%.
So thank you, my friend, and thank you, everybody who's there.
Thank you, Salim.
Thank you.
Go have a
Good
rest.
night.
Good night.
Good night. Bye bye.
Bye. Well, there you have it. Our national treasure, Salim Mansour, just put into context that everything revolves around the globalists. The globalists puppet everything. They control all of this. And when I see people reacting emotionally to what happened in the Middle East, I immediately discredit them because their reaction is based on emotions, not intellect. And so this episode needs to be shared far and wide. Everybody needs to see this and have it put into context for them so they understand exactly what's happening, what's at stake. Here it is. All right. So that's going to be a wrap, you guys. Thanks for hanging out. Share this out. And we'll talk to you next time. Ciao.